The Great Hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as the final vote appeared on the massive display screen. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched the numbers climb higher and higher until they stopped at 847. Every single member species had voted the same way. Humanity was banished from civilized space. Chairman Vexhi's 4 eyes blinked slowly as he read the official statement. His voice echoed through the chamber without emotion. The Council finds that humanity poses a continuing threat to galactic stability. Their unpredictable nature, excessive emotional responses, and dangerous tendency toward innovation make them unsuitable for membership in civilized society. Sarah Chen stood up from her seat in the human section. She was alone now. The other human diplomats had been recalled weeks ago when the trial began. The alien representatives expected her to shout, to argue, to make one of those passionate speeches humans were known for. Instead, she simply nodded. "The Human Federation accepts the Council's decision," she said in a calm voice. "We request 6 months to evacuate our colonies and withdraw from all Council territories." The silence in the hall grew deeper. This was not how they expected humans to react. Where was the anger? Where were the threats? Chairman Vexhi's tentacles twitched nervously. 6 months is acceptable, he finally said. "All human presence must be removed from Council space by then." Sarah Chen bowed slightly. "It will be done." She gathered her papers and walked out of the hall. Her footsteps echoed in the silence behind her. Within hours, the evacuation began. On every human world, in every space station, at every research facility, the same message arrived. Pack everything. Leave nothing behind. Go quietly. The speed of the human response surprised everyone. Ships that had been scattered across the galaxy suddenly appeared at human colonies. Massive cargo vessels began loading equipment, personal belongings, and entire families. Space elevators worked around the clock, moving people and supplies to the waiting ships. On New Terra, the most successful human colony, Mayor David Rodriguez watched families stream toward the spaceport. Children carried their pets in travel cages. Parents loaded photo albums and family treasures onto hover carts. Old people said goodbye to gardens they had spent decades growing. "Are we really just giving up?" asked Dr. Lisa Park, the colony's chief scientist. "After everything we built here?" Rodriguez looked out at the city they had carved from wilderness 50 years ago. The gleaming towers, the green parks, the schools where human and alien children had played together. Sarah's orders were clear. "We leave quietly and with dignity." "But this is our home too," Dr. Park said. "Was our home," Rodriguez corrected. "Now we make a new one." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on dozens of worlds. Human traders closed their shops and transferred their businesses to alien partners. Human teachers said goodbye to their students and handed over their lesson plans. Human doctors finished treating their patients and trained replacements in their techniques. The aliens watched with growing confusion. They had expected protests, legal challenges, maybe even violent resistance. Instead, humans packed their belongings with the same efficiency they showed in everything else. They left detailed instruction manuals for the equipment they could not take. They paid all their debts and honored all their contracts right up to the departure date. Captain Maria Santos commanded one of the last ships to leave the Kepler system. As her vessel pulled away from the mining station where she had worked for 10 years, she sent a final message to the Tharaki manager who was taking over operations. "All the equipment is in perfect working order," she said. "The maintenance schedules are programmed into the computers. The safety protocols are clearly marked. You should have no problems." Manager Clickstar watched the human ship disappear into hyperspace. The mining operation continued exactly as before. The automated systems hummed along perfectly. Everything was running smoothly. On the diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Ambassador Chen made her final report to Earth. "All human personnel have been evacuated from Council space. All facilities have been transferred to local authorities. All agreements have been terminated according to legal requirements." President Martinez appeared on the communication screen from Earth. "Any sign of regret from the Council?" "None," Chen replied. "They seem relieved that we left so quietly. I think they expected us to cause problems." "Maybe we should have," Martinez said with a bitter smile. Chen shook her head. "No, we leave with our dignity intact. Let history judge whether they made the right choice." The final human ships gathered at the edge of known space. Thousands of vessels formed up in convoy formation. Families said goodbye to the galaxy that had been their home for generations. Young people wondered what lay beyond the galactic rim. Scientists excited about new discoveries mixed with families mourning lost homes. Admiral Chen, Sarah's sister, commanded the lead ship. She opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "Citizens of humanity," she said. "Today we begin a new chapter. We leave behind a galaxy that could not accept our differences. We go forward to build something better." The ships turned toward the darkness beyond the galactic edge and began their journey into the unknown. Behind them, the civilized galaxy settled into peace and order. Trade routes that humans had managed were transferred to other species. Research projects continued under new leadership. Everything seemed normal. The Galactic Council held a celebration 3 days after the last human ship disappeared. Representatives from 847 species gathered to mark the beginning of what they called the Age of Proper Order. Chairman HFY gave a speech about stability and predictability. The crowd cheered. "Finally," said Councillor Zethara from the Meridian Union, "we can focus on serious matters without human interference. No more unexpected solutions to problems," agreed Trade Commissioner Salthek. "No more emotional outbursts in negotiations. No more dangerous experiments," added Science Director Quilmes. "Just proper methodical research." The party lasted late into the station's night cycle. Aliens from across the galaxy celebrated their victory over chaos. They toasted the return of order. They congratulated themselves on making the galaxy safe for civilized beings. In the weeks that followed, life in Council space continued exactly as planned. Ships followed their scheduled routes. Research proceeded according to established protocols. Diplomats conducted business with proper formality. Everything was predictable, orderly, and efficient. The aliens were pleased with their decision. They had removed the disruptive element from their society. Now they could build the perfect civilization they had always dreamed of. No more surprises. No more emotional complications. No more humans changing everything just when it seemed to be working properly. They were so focused on their achievement that they did not notice the small problems beginning to appear. Shipping delays that lasted a few hours longer than expected. Equipment failures that took slightly more time to repair. Research projects that moved a little more slowly than planned. These were tiny changes barely worth mentioning in official reports. The galaxy was still functioning perfectly. The removal of humanity had been a complete success, or so they believed. Beyond the galactic rim, human ships continued their journey into the unknown. They carried with them the dreams of a species that refused to be contained by someone else's definition of order. They headed toward a future that no algorithm could predict and no committee could plan. Behind them, the galaxy they left began its slow descent into the very stagnation they had spent centuries fighting against. But that realization would come later. 3 months after the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic rim, Trade Commissioner HFY of the Zilani Consortium stared at his morning reports with growing concern. The numbers did not make sense. Piracy attacks along the outer spiral trade routes had increased by 312% in the past month. These were routes that had been completely safe for decades when humans managed them. Now cargo ships were being robbed almost daily. "How is this possible?" HFY asked his assistant, a young Zilani named Corvin. "The security systems are exactly the same as before." Corvin pulled up the technical reports on his datapad. "The automated defense networks are functioning perfectly, sir. All sensors are working. All weapons platforms are operational, but somehow the pirates are getting through." HFY studied the attack patterns. The pirates were not using any new technology or advanced tactics. They were simply finding gaps in the security that had never existed before. It was as if the defense systems had developed blind spots overnight. "Contact the human contractors who designed these systems," HFY ordered. "Sir, all humans have been banned from Council space," Corvin reminded him. "We cannot contact them." "Then find their technical manuals." "There must be documentation somewhere." Corvin looked uncomfortable. "We have all the official documentation, sir. But the human technicians made many modifications over the years. They said the changes were too small to document formally." HFY felt his 4 stomachs clench with worry. "What kind of modifications?" "We are not sure, sir." The humans called them minor adjustments and field improvements. They said the changes helped the systems adapt to new threats. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Silthara faced a different but equally frustrating problem. The Altarian Research Institute had been the most productive science facility in Council space. Now her team could barely complete basic experiments. "The equipment is working perfectly," she told her research partner Dr. Velquan. "All our procedures are exactly the same as before." But our progress has slowed to almost nothing. Dr. Velquan checked their latest test results. Perhaps we need to be more systematic in our approach. We are already following every protocol exactly, Dr. Silthera replied. Our methodology is flawless, but we are not making any discoveries. She pulled up the Institute's research history on her computer screen. For 30 years, they had produced breakthrough discoveries almost monthly. New medicines, improved technologies, revolutionary theories about the universe. But almost all of those breakthroughs had come from projects that included human researchers. Look at this, she said, pointing at the data. Every major discovery we made involved humans suggesting unexpected experiments or noticing patterns we missed. Humans are not methodical, Dr. Velquan said dismissively. They just try random things and hope for good results. Maybe, Dr. Silthera said slowly. But somehow their random attempts led to more discoveries than our careful planning. The problems were not limited to research and security. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Foreman Clickstar watched his operation fall apart despite his best efforts. The humans had left detailed instruction manuals for all the equipment. Every procedure was documented. Every safety protocol was clearly explained, but something was going wrong. The primary excavator has broken down again, reported his assistant, Yilham. That is the 4th time this week. Clickstar checked the maintenance schedule on his datapad. The automated systems show everything is working perfectly. The machine should not be failing. The human supervisor used to check the excavator every morning, Yilham said. She would make small adjustments to the settings. What kind of adjustments? Clickstar asked. Yilham looked through the old work logs. The records just say routine calibration and minor optimization. Nothing specific. Clickstar felt frustrated. The humans had followed all the official procedures, but they had also done dozens of small tasks that they never bothered to document. They seemed to know intuitively when something needed attention, even when the computer said everything was fine. Try to contact the human who used to work here, he ordered. Sir, humans are banned from council space, Yilham reminded him. Even communication with them is now illegal. The same story played out across hundreds of worlds. Factories that had run smoothly for decades began experiencing unexpected breakdowns. Transportation systems developed mysterious delays. Power plants required constant repairs despite having perfect maintenance records. In every case, the problem was the same. The automated systems and documented procedures worked exactly as designed. But the humans had been making countless tiny adjustments that were never recorded in any manual. They had been solving problems before those problems became serious enough to trigger official alerts. Councillor Zathara called an emergency meeting of the Economic Committee. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss the growing list of operational difficulties. These are just temporary adjustment problems, insisted Trade Director Morgath. Every major change causes some disruption. The systems will stabilize once we adapt to operating without human interference. How long will that take? Asked Mining Commissioner Tolvar. My operations are losing money every day. The humans did not have any special knowledge, Science Advisor Quilmes said firmly. They simply did not follow proper procedures. Once we establish correct protocols, everything will improve. But privately, some council members were beginning to worry. Reports of inefficiency and system failures were arriving daily. Small problems that had been solved quickly during the human era now dragged on for weeks. Equipment that had never failed before was breaking down regularly. Maintenance Chief Sektar of the Central Station had worked with humans for 20 years. He understood their methods better than most aliens. When the station's environmental systems began malfunctioning, he knew what the problem was. The humans did not just follow maintenance schedules, he explained to Station Commander Welthax. They listened to how the machine sounded. They felt for vibrations that were not quite right. They noticed small changes that the sensors could not detect. That is not scientific, Commander Welthax replied. Proper maintenance follows documented procedures and sensor readings. Yes, sir, Sektar agreed. But the humans prevented problems before they became emergencies. Now we only know something is wrong when it fails completely. The commander was not convinced. Humans are too emotional to be reliable. Their intuitive methods are just guesswork. 3 weeks later, the station's main power generator exploded without warning. All the sensors had shown normal operation right up until the failure. The backup systems prevented a disaster, but the investigation found evidence that the generator had been developing problems for months. A human technician would have noticed the subtle signs and repaired it before it failed. Similar incidents began occurring throughout council space. Systems that had been reliable for decades suddenly became unpredictable. The careful order that the aliens had worked so hard to achieve was developing cracks, but the council leadership refused to admit there was a serious problem. They issued statements about temporary difficulties and adjustment periods. They promised that new procedures would solve all the issues. They insisted that removing the chaotic human element had been the right decision. The problems continued to grow. Dr. Silthera made one last attempt to understand what had changed. She reviewed every research project her institute had completed in the past 5 years. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Projects with human researchers had produced unexpected breakthroughs by exploring ideas that seemed illogical. Projects without humans had followed established methods and achieved predictable results. The difference was not just productivity, but the kind of discoveries being made. We are not thinking of new ideas, she realized. We are only improving old ones. Without humans to suggest wild experiments and pursue impossible theories, scientific progress had slowed to a crawl. The galaxy was becoming more efficient at doing what it already knew how to do, but it was losing the ability to discover anything truly new. The first cracks in galactic civilization were spreading, but most aliens still believed they could be repaired with better planning and stricter procedures. They did not yet understand that they had banished the very thing that kept their society from breaking apart. 1 year after the human exodus, General Thakmor of the Vorthak Empire stood in his command center watching his military fall apart. The massive display screens showed red warning indicators across half their territory. 3 different rebel groups had attacked their outposts in the past week, and his forces had failed to stop any of them. How did they break through our defenses? He demanded from his staff officers. Colonel Vextar consulted his tactical reports. Our forces followed standard attack protocols exactly, sir. Every maneuver was executed perfectly according to the manual. Then why did we lose? General Thakmor's voice echoed through the command center. The enemy used unexpected tactics, sir, Colonel Vextar said carefully. They did not follow conventional military doctrine. General Thakmor slammed his clawed hand on the console. Our doctrine has worked for centuries. It is based on mathematical analysis of optimal strategies. What he did not want to admit was that Vorthak military doctrine had worked because human officers had been there to adapt it when situations changed. The humans had never followed the rules exactly. They had modified tactics on the spot, found creative solutions to impossible problems, and somehow made the rigid Vorthak system flexible enough to handle real combat. Now, when battle plans failed, Vorthak commanders had no idea what to do next. They could execute the standard procedures perfectly, but they could not think of new approaches when the old ones stopped working. The military crisis was only one part of a much larger collapse. Entertainment systems across the galaxy had ground to a halt. For decades, human musicians, writers, and artists had created content that billions of aliens enjoyed. Other species had tried to copy human creativity, but their attempts produced boring, predictable results. On the pleasure world of Risa 7th, entertainment director Zelkor stared at the latest audience ratings with growing panic. Viewership had dropped by 78% in the past 6 months. Tourists were canceling their reservations. The planet's entire economy was based on providing entertainment, and suddenly nobody wanted what they were offering. What about the new shows produced by the Centauri Studios? Zelkor asked his assistant. The focus groups called them mathematically perfect but emotionally empty, the assistant replied. The plots follow all the established rules for successful entertainment, but audiences find them boring. Zelkor pulled up samples of human-created content from before the Exodus. The stories were unpredictable, sometimes illogical, and often broke established rules about proper narrative structure. But they were also exciting, moving, and memorable in ways that the new algorithmic content could never match. Can we hire human writers? He asked hopefully. Sir, humans are banned from council space, his assistant reminded him. Even hiring them as contractors is illegal now. The economic consequences spread far beyond entertainment. Human traders had managed many of the galaxy's most profitable trade routes, not because they had the best ships or the most money, but because they understood how to build relationships with different species. They had known which alien cultures valued personal friendship over formal contracts, which ones preferred detailed negotiations versus quick handshake deals. Trade Commissioner Vex-High watched his carefully planned trading system collapse as alien merchants failed to work together. The Tharaki wanted everything in writing with legal guarantees. The Zilani preferred verbal agreements based on trust. The Meridians required complex ceremonial exchanges before any business could begin. Human traders had somehow navigated all these different requirements and made everyone happy. Now, with only algorithmic trading protocols to follow, most interspecies commerce had ground to a halt. The crisis deepened when environmental disasters began striking terraformed worlds. The planet Kepler 438b had been a lush paradise just 6 months ago. Now its ecosystems were collapsing as invasive species spread out of control, and native plants died from mysterious diseases. Dr. Rontel, the Altarian environmental scientist in charge of the planet, studied the catastrophe with growing confusion. All our biological models predicted a stable ecosystem, she told her research team. The computer simulations showed perfect balance between all species. Perhaps we made an error in our calculations, suggested her assistant. Dr. Rontel shook her head. I have checked every number a dozen times. According to all scientific analysis, this ecosystem should be thriving. What she did not understand was that human terraformers had never relied purely on computer models. They had used intuition, experience, and what they called gut feelings to make adjustments that no algorithm could predict. They had understood that living systems were too complex to be perfectly planned, and had constantly made small changes to keep everything in balance. Without human terraformers making those constant adjustments, even the most carefully designed ecosystems began falling apart. The medical crisis hit next. The galaxy's first major pandemic in 2 centuries spread rapidly through the core worlds. The disease was not particularly deadly, but it caused severe neurological symptoms that left patients unable to work for months. Dr. Morgeth, head of the Galactic Health Organization, watched infection rates climb despite his best efforts. His teams followed every established protocol for disease containment. They had the most advanced medical technology in galactic history, but the pandemic continued spreading. Our treatment methods are not working, reported Dr. Sylvan from the Central Medical Facility. The standard antiviral drugs have no effect. Have you tried experimental treatments? Dr. Morgeth asked. Sir, experimental treatments require extensive testing and approval processes, Dr. Sylvan replied. It would take years to develop new medicines using proper procedures. Dr. Morgeth knew that human doctors had often used experimental treatments during emergencies. They had tried unusual combinations of existing drugs, tested radical new approaches, and somehow found solutions that conventional medicine missed. But human medical practices had been considered too risky and unscientific. Now, faced with a spreading pandemic, the aliens' careful, methodical approach was failing while people suffered. The problems cascaded through every aspect of galactic civilization. Agricultural systems that had fed billions began failing as crop diseases spread faster than scientists could study them. Transportation networks experienced increasing delays as automated systems failed to adapt to changing conditions. Even basic infrastructure began breaking down as maintenance. Schedules proved inadequate without human intuition to spot problems early. Counselor. Zathara called emergency. Sessions of the Galactic Council almost weekly, but the representatives had no solutions to offer. Every proposal involved more planning, better procedures, and stricter adherence to established protocols. The same approaches that had failed to prevent the problems in the first place. We need to be more systematic, insisted Science Director Quilmes during one heated debate. The problems are occurring because we are not following proper procedures. We are following every procedure exactly. Trade Commissioner Vexhai shot back. The procedures are not working. Then we need better procedures, Quilmes replied stubbornly. A few council members began quietly suggesting that perhaps they had made a mistake in banishing humanity. But these voices were quickly silenced by the majority, who insisted that the problems were temporary and would be solved through better organization. Chairman Vexhai maintained public confidence in the council's decisions, but privately he was beginning to worry. Reports of system failures, economic collapse, and social unrest arrived daily. The galaxy that had seemed so stable and orderly was falling apart at the seams. He pulled up historical records of previous galactic crises and made a disturbing discovery. Every major emergency of the past century had been resolved through human intervention, not through human technology or military power, but through their unique ability to find unexpected solutions and adapt to changing situations. The Meridian Plague, had been stopped by human doctors who tried experimental treatments that violated every medical protocol. The Outer Rim War had ended when human diplomats convinced natural enemies to work together. The great economic collapse had been reversed by human economists who ignored traditional theories and implemented radical new policies. In every case, the humans had succeeded by doing exactly what the Council had banned them for: being unpredictable, emotional, and innovative. Chairman Vex High closed the historical files and stared out at the stars beyond his office window. Somewhere out there, beyond the galactic rim, humanity was building a new civilization. They had been gone for only 1 year, but already their absence was destroying everything the Council had worked to preserve. The galaxy was learning a painful lesson about the difference between order and stagnation. Without chaos to drive change, even the most perfect system would eventually break down, and they were running out of time to fix it. 18 months after the human exodus, the galaxy exploded into its first major war in over 2 centuries. The conflict began with a simple trade dispute between the Vorthak Empire and the Meridian Union over mining rights in the outer spiral. Within weeks, it had drawn in dozens of species and spread across 3 sectors. Admiral Kreshitar of the Vorthak Imperial Fleet watched his forces engage the enemy fleet above the contested world of Sigma Draconis. His ships were superior in every measurable way. His crews were better trained. His tactics were mathematically proven to be optimal. But somehow he was losing. "Report from the 3rd Battle Group," his communications officer announced. "They have suffered heavy casualties and are requesting new orders." Admiral Kreshitar studied his tactical display with growing frustration. The enemy was not following any recognized military doctrine. Their movements seemed random, almost chaotic. But every time his forces tried to exploit what looked like tactical errors, they found themselves walking into traps. "Have they changed their attack pattern again?" he asked his tactical analyst. "Yes, sir. This is the 4th different formation they have used in the past hour," the analyst replied. "Our combat computers cannot predict their next move." What Admiral Kreshitar did not understand was that the Meridian forces were not following any plan at all. Their human military advisors had been banished along with all other humans. Now their commanders were improvising desperately, trying anything that might work. Their random tactics were succeeding precisely because they were impossible to predict. The war dragged on for months with neither side able to achieve victory. Both fleets were designed to fight according to established military principles. When those principles failed, they had no backup plans. The conflict that should have been decided in weeks became a grinding stalemate that consumed resources and lives with no end in sight. The war was just one symptom of the galaxy's deeper crisis. Council member Kalthus of the Meridian Union made a disturbing discovery while researching historical precedents for the current emergency. She had been looking for similar wars in galactic history to understand how they had been resolved. What she found changed everything. Every major crisis in the past century was resolved by humans, she told her research assistant, Dr. Velkin. Not just some of them. All of them. Dr. Velkun looked skeptical. Surely other species contributed to these solutions. Kalthus pulled up the historical records on her computer screen. Look at the data. The Meridian Plague ended when human doctors ignored safety protocols and tested experimental treatments on themselves. The Outer Rim Rebellion stopped when human diplomats convinced 3 enemy species to form an alliance that everyone said was impossible. She scrolled through more examples. The Great Trade War, resolved by human economists who proposed a completely new monetary system that violated every established principle of galactic finance. The Zeta Reticuli incident, prevented from becoming a full war when human negotiators spent 6 months living with both sides and somehow got them to understand each other's perspectives. Dr. Velkun studied the files with growing unease. What about more recent crises? The same pattern, Kalthus replied. The agricultural blight of 10 years ago. Solved when human scientists created hybrid crops that should not have been biologically possible. The Centauri system collapse. Prevented when human engineers built a solar stabilizer using improvised technology that no computer model said would work. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. For over a century, human unpredictability had been the galaxy's safety valve. When normal methods failed, when established procedures broke down, when logical approaches proved inadequate, humans had somehow found solutions that no one else could imagine. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was discovering what happened when an ordered system had no way to adapt to unexpected problems. The discovery came too late to prevent the next catastrophe. The Xerox Federation, desperate to end the ongoing war, decided to use their most advanced diplomatic protocol to negotiate peace. They had spent decades developing an algorithmic approach to conflict resolution that could analyze any dispute and propose optimal solutions. Ambassador Thelvar of the Xerox Federation arrived at the peace talks confident that their system would succeed where traditional diplomacy had failed. The computer algorithms had analyzed thousands of historical treaties and identified the mathematical principles behind successful negotiations. The talks lasted exactly 4 hours before they collapsed into chaos. "Your proposed solution is completely unacceptable," declared General Thakmor of the Vorthak Empire. "The algorithm indicates this is the optimal outcome for both parties." "Ambassador," Thelvar replied calmly, "your algorithm does not understand Vorthak honor." General Thakmor growled, "We cannot accept terms that make us appear weak to our enemies." Ambassador Thelvar consulted his computer tablet. Honor is an emotional concept that interferes with rational decision-making. The algorithm has eliminated such factors to achieve pure logical solutions. The Vorthak delegation walked out immediately. Within hours, they had declared war on the Xerox Federation as well. Instead of ending one conflict, the algorithmic diplomacy had started a new one. Human diplomats had succeeded because they understood that emotions, pride, fear, and cultural traditions were not obstacles to overcome, but essential factors to work with. They had spent time learning about alien cultures, building personal relationships, and finding creative compromises that satisfied everyone's emotional needs as well as their practical requirements. The algorithmic approach ignored all of these human elements and failed catastrophically. The independent systems alliance faced its own crisis as member worlds began withdrawing from the Confederation. The alliance had been held together by informal networks of trust and friendship, most of which had been maintained by human traders and diplomats. President Morketh of the Alliance Council watched his government fall apart as communication between member species broke down. The formal treaties that defined the alliance were still valid, but the personal relationships that made it actually work had disappeared with the humans. "The Altarians are refusing to honor their defense commitments," reported his chief of staff. "They say the formal language of the treaty is ambiguous." "What about the Centauri?" President Morketh asked. "They are demanding renegotiation of all trade agreements. They claim the current terms are unfair." President Morketh knew that the treaties had always been ambiguous and the trade terms had never been perfectly fair. But human mediators had somehow made it all work, by building trust between species that had natural reasons to distrust each other. Without those human connections, old grievances and suspicions were tearing the alliance apart. Food shortages plagued the core worlds as agricultural systems continued failing. The problem was not just crop diseases, but the loss of the innovation that had kept food production ahead of population growth. Human farmers had constantly developed new techniques, created new crop varieties, and found ways to grow food in challenging environments. Agricultural Director Sekvar watched food riots break out on 3 different worlds in the same week. The automated farming systems were producing exactly what they had been programmed to produce, but it was not enough to feed everyone. "Can we increase production?" he asked his technical staff. "Not without modifying the existing systems," his chief engineer replied. "But any changes would require extensive testing and approval processes." "How long would that take?" "At least 5 years, sir. Maybe 10. Sekvar knew that human farmers would have found solutions in 5 weeks, not 5 years. They would have tried experimental techniques, improvised new equipment, and somehow increased yields despite all the technical limitations. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council grew, increasingly desperate as representatives tried to find solutions to multiple simultaneous crises. The war continued to spread. The alliance was fragmenting. Food shortages were causing social unrest. Economic systems were breaking down. Medical research had stagnated just when new diseases were appearing. "We need to implement more systematic approaches," insisted Science Director Quilmus during one particularly heated session. "Systematic approaches are not working," Trade Commissioner Vexai shouted back. "Everything is falling apart despite our perfect procedures." "Then we need even better procedures," Quilmus replied stubbornly. Councillor Zethara stood up and spoke the words that many were thinking but none had dared to say. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should contact the humans. The chamber fell silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Chairman Vexai broke the silence. The council voted unanimously to banish humanity. We cannot simply reverse that decision because we are experiencing temporary difficulties. These are not temporary difficulties, Zethara replied. Our civilization is collapsing. We can solve these problems without human chaos, the chairman insisted. We just need to be more organized, more systematic, more logical. But privately, even he was beginning to doubt. The galaxy had been stable for so long that nobody remembered what it was like to live without human innovation, keeping everything from stagnating. They had mistaken the absence of major crises for proof that their system was perfect, not realizing that humans had been preventing those crises from happening in the first 2 years after the human exodus. Galactic Council Chairwoman Zefara led an unprecedented mission beyond the galactic rim. Her ship, the Harmony of Worlds, carried representatives from 50 different species and carried with it the desperate hope of a dying civilization. The journey to human space took 3 weeks. Following signal traces and energy signatures that their best scientists had detected, what they found when they arrived defied all their expectations and calculations. Are these readings correct? Chairwoman Zefara asked her science officer, staring at the sensor display in disbelief. I have checked them 5 times, Chairwoman, Dr. Silthara replied. Human civilization has expanded across 17 galaxy clusters. Their technology appears to be centuries ahead of our own, and they have made peaceful contact with over 40 previously unknown alien species. Through the viewscreen, they could see massive space stations that dwarfed anything in Council space. Ships moved between them in patterns that seemed chaotic but were obviously efficient. Energy readings indicated power sources that the Council's best scientists could not identify. How is this possible? Asked Trade Commissioner Vexai. They have only been gone for 2 years. Perhaps humans adapt faster than we thought, Dr. Silthara said quietly. The human response to their arrival was immediate and welcoming. A fleet of sleek ships approached the Council vessel, but their movements were clearly peaceful. A communication signal came through within minutes. Council ship Harmony of Worlds, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Frontier Alliance. You are welcome in human space. Please follow our escort ships to Sanctuary Station. Chairwoman Zefara recognized the name. Sarah Chen had been the human ambassador who accepted the banishment so calmly 2 years ago. Now she held the title of Admiral President of what appeared to be a vast human empire. Sanctuary Station was beyond anything the Council representatives had imagined. The massive structure housed millions of beings from dozens of different species. Markets bustled with trade between humans and aliens that the Council had never encountered. Research laboratories buzzed with joint projects between human and alien scientists. Admiral President Chen met them in a conference room that overlooked the station's main hub. She looked older than when they had last seen her, but her eyes held a confidence that had not been there during the banishment trial. Welcome to Sanctuary Station, she said warmly. I assume you are not here for a social visit? Chairwoman Zefara struggled to find the right words. How do you apologize for destroying an entire civilization? How do you ask for help from people you have wronged so badly? Our galaxy is dying, she said finally. War, starvation, economic collapse, environmental disasters. Everything is falling apart. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. We have been monitoring your communications. The situation appears to be quite serious. We need your help, Chairwoman Zefara continued. We realize now that we made a terrible mistake. Humanity was not our problem. You were our solution. The Council representatives spent the next 3 days touring human space and learning about what humanity had accomplished. They visited worlds where humans worked alongside silicon-based life forms from the Andromeda Galaxy. They saw research stations where human intuition was combined with mathematical precision, from species that thought in ways no Council race could understand. How did you do all this so quickly? Dr. Silthara asked during a visit to a terraforming project. Dr. Maria Santos, the human scientist leading the project, smiled. We did not have to spend time following procedures that did not work. We could experiment freely, try new approaches, and learn from our mistakes. But surely you made many errors without proper oversight, Dr. Silthara said. Of course we did, Dr. Santos agreed. But we learned from them quickly and tried again. Fast failure and rapid adaptation work better than slow perfection that never comes. The alien representatives began to understand what they had lost. Human civilization had not just survived banishment, It had thrived because it was free to be what it naturally was, adaptable, innovative, and unafraid of change. On the third day, Admiral Chen called a formal meeting with the entire council delegation. She sat across from them in the same conference room where they had first met. But now the power dynamic was completely different. "You came here to ask for our help," she said directly. "What exactly are you proposing?" Chairwoman Zafara took a deep breath. "We want humans to return to council space. We will rescind the banishment order and restore full membership to humanity." "As subjects of the Galactic Council?" Admiral Chen asked. "Yes, of course," Chairwoman Zafara replied. "With full representation and voting rights." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "That will not work. We can offer better terms," Trade Commissioner Vex High said quickly. "Expanded trade rights, priority status in council decisions." "You still do not understand," Admiral Chen said gently. "We told you that you were our chaos, but you never understood that you were our stagnation. You gave us order and we gave you growth. You offered us stability, and we provided you with hope. It was symbiosis, not parasitism." She stood and walked to the window overlooking the bustling station. "For centuries you kept us in line just enough to prevent us from becoming completely unpredictable. And we kept you moving forward just enough to prevent you from becoming completely static. Neither of us could survive alone for long. Then come back," Councillor Zathara pleaded. "Help us rebuild what we destroyed." "We will help," Admiral Chen said. "But not as your subjects. We will come back as your equals, as partners in something new." She turned back to face them. "No more Galactic Council making decisions for everyone. No more rules that prevent species from being what they naturally are. We propose a new kind of organization. A confederation where different approaches to problems are seen as strengths, not weaknesses." Dr. Silthera leaned forward. "What would that look like?" "Chaotic human intuition working alongside methodical alien logic," Admiral Chen replied. "Emotional decision-making balanced by rational analysis. Innovation encouraged rather than controlled. Diversity celebrated rather than eliminated." The council representatives spent hours debating the proposal. Some worried about giving up the order and control they had worked so hard to maintain. Others argued that their system had already collapsed and they had nothing left to lose. In the end, desperation won over pride. "We accept your terms," Chairwoman Zafara announced. "How do we begin?" Admiral Chen smiled. "We start small. Joint colonies in the Outer Rim where humans and aliens work together as equals. Research stations where different ways of thinking can combine to solve problems neither could handle alone. Trade partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than council regulations." "And if these experiments succeed?" asked Trade Commissioner Vex High. "Then we expand them gradually until the entire galaxy learns that civilization is not about eliminating differences." Admiral Chen replied. "It is about harmonizing them." The first joint human-alien colony was established 6 months later on a world at the edge of council space. Human farmers worked alongside Thraki engineers and Altarian scientists to create something none of them could have built alone. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within a year, dozens of similar projects were underway. Human innovation combined with alien precision to solve problems that had seemed impossible. Economic systems that balanced efficiency with creativity. Military strategies that used both logic and intuition. Research projects that produced breakthrough discoveries by combining methodical analysis with wild experimentation. The galaxy slowly began to heal. The wars ended not through victory, but through creative compromises that satisfied everyone's needs. Food production increased as human innovation was combined with alien agricultural science. Medical research accelerated as emotional human doctors worked with logical alien researchers to find treatments that neither could develop alone. 5 years after the Exodus, the Galactic Council formally dissolved itself and was replaced by the Confederation of Worlds. The new organization had no single ruling authority and no universal laws. Instead, it provided a framework for different species to work together while remaining true to their own natures. Admiral Chen, now Director General of the Confederation, stood in her office looking out at a galaxy that was more diverse, more chaotic, and more alive than it had ever been before. Ships from hundreds of species moved along trade routes that combined efficiency with flexibility. Research stations produced discoveries that would have been impossible under the old system. Worlds flourished under the care of both human intuition and alien science. The galaxy had learned its most important lesson. True civilization was not about creating perfect order. but about finding the right balance between order and chaos, between stability and change, between the known and the unknown. Humanity had returned not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners in a dance between structure and freedom that would continue for generations to come. The future was unpredictable again, and that made it full of possibilities. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was truly alive.